Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Phenomenon, a Paranormal podcast. I am your host, Christina.
I'm Allie.
And I'm Anthony.
And today we're going to be talking about one of our favorite topics, which is the missing 411 phenomenon. If you're not familiar with it, I'm going to have Anthony here explain to you what that is. And, you know, everything paranormal doesn't always fit into the ghost or cryptid or alien framework. So it's what is not normal, right? So, Anthony, can you tell everyone what this is all about?
Yeah.
Who's not familiar?
So, for those of you who don't know, there's a man out there, really well known in conspiracy theorist circles, named David Paulides. And he was a former law enforcement agent who, after his career ended kind of with the police, he took it upon himself to go looking for Bigfoot. He made a big name for himself publishing books, finding Bigfoot and his encounters with Sasquatch. It was during this time where he went to a national park and struck up a conversation with the park service ranger there. And he was familiar with David Paulides' work and brought it to his attention that there's a lot of strange missing persons cases in the National Forest Service. And that's what kind of led David Paulides to go on a search, of these cases. And it turns out it's all across the country that there are like hundreds and possibly even thousands of missing persons cases that they disappeared under very strange circumstances.
Right.
And not every case is the same. Some of them have never been found, unfortunately. Some have been found, but under weird circumstances. Others do involve very strange paranormal activity. Mm-hmm. So it all ranges. And to this day, he still hasn't found the answer to why this is happening yet, other than he believes there's a lack of effort from the Park Service range. There's no correlation.
That he's teamwork involved.
Yeah.
Different agencies.
They don't have like a list connecting all these cases, and so not everyone is familiar in different regions.
Right.
With that, some similar circumstances happen to another person. So that's what got this whole thing started, and that's what he dubbed the missing 411. All the people who have disappeared under mysterious circumstances in national parks.
And at the end of all this, we'll hopefully have time to talk about some of the theories out there of what could be causing some of these disappearances. But we're going to start off with the case that got David Paulides interested in this whole concept, because I think when he mentioned him talking to Park Service rangers, it was about this case.
Right. So I'm going to kind of go over the ins and outs of the first very strange case, but it gets weirder as we go on, of course.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the first ones, the first one, was the case of, let me go back down, Dr. Maurice Damitz.
Damitz?
We don't know if we're butchering that, but hopefully that's his name. He was an 84-year-old theology professor. He was actually really known for a lot of his hardcore religious rhetoric.
Right.
So he was known in those circles for being very outspoken about that.
End of days kind of stuff.
Yeah, end of days, and that the literal Antichrist, devil, whatever you want to call him, was going to come back and basically get us all very soon.
Okay.
In our lifetime, at least. But then he became more well known for his strange disappearance. So when he wasn't talking about all of his religious beliefs, he was also very interested in collecting rocks. And so he would go out to the Pike National Forest in Colorado, and he usually went with his friend David McSherry. They were going this day to hunt for topaz. And the reason he went out with this friend a lot is because, he's 84 years old. He has a hard time getting around, and he needed someone there to kind of like help him navigate everything in the forest.
Didn't he have like really bad knees?
Yeah,
or something?
really bad knees. So it was hard for him, and he couldn't really get anywhere fast. So that was, I think, what makes this case even stranger in the end.
Imagine carrying gear.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So, it gets weirder, though.
Okay.
So he had a lot of health problems aside from the knees, but that was the main one that would make it the most difficult for him to navigate the terrain. So they spent the day digging around for the rocks, and they had a system where they wouldn't be very far from each other, and they would check in within about 15 minutes if they were not far, but maybe 100 yards from each other. They would check in every 15 minutes, and he would go find his friend, or vice versa. And so at one point, they split up about 100 yards, and McSherry went off and was looking for Topaz. And when he came back, the doctor was completely vanished along with his tools.
Okay.
And he had been with him only 10 minutes prior. And it didn't make a lot of sense because, again, he's an older man with really bad knees and he couldn't have gotten far, you would think at least. But just upon searching the surrounding area, there was like no trace of him whatsoever. Not his tools, not blood, any sign of attack, nothing.
Wow.
So he went on searching the surroundings, and then he ended up getting help involved. And there was, I believe, a 5-day intensive search, but they couldn't find a trace of him, his tools, or anything that would even remotely tell you what happened to him.
Right.
So this is what first caught the attention of David Paulides, and kind of spiraled into finding more and more cases that became even stranger.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
There's some really strange ones out there.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that was the first main one.
Wow.
And, yes, they never found him.
Wow.
So, even to this day, which is
Yeah.
really sad. But,
It is.
you know, I think that's the hardest part about a lot of these cases is the fact that there's literally not even close to an answer.
Well, yeah, I mean, you guys know, and our audience may not know this, but
Yeah.
I also have a missing persons podcast that I do.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was really centered around the high desert area in Southern California,
Yeah.
because that's where we're from. And it's the San Bernardino Mountains are right in that neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Right.
And there were so many cases that involved that general area, and one in particular that still breaks my heart to this day, that they're still looking for Jesus Morales, which ironically is my
Jesus Rivera.
Rivera. I'm sorry.
That's our grandfather.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
But he just was on a job and went outside of the cabin
Yeah.
and never came back. They still have no trace of him whatsoever.
Yeah.
There's a lot to that case, but then when I see stuff like that, knowing about the missing 411, it all just kind of brings it back.
And it's heartbreaking.
It is. You
can't,
feel for the
figure it
families.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, you really
So,
do.
yeah, that was the first main case that really
Okay.
kicked off this whole thing.
Yeah.
So, I know you have an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, very interesting because this one actually does involve the person being found, but very strangely. So, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but this is a Canadian firefighter named Danny Paulides.
Yeah.
So he went missing in 2018. He was on a ski trip with his friends in upstate New York near Lake Placid.
Okay.
So they spent about a day skiing. They had no problems whatsoever. They were getting along great. And around 2 p.m., they were getting ready to head back to their cabin. And Danny decided, he wanted to grab his cell phone before he went back to the cabin. So he told him, hey, I'll be right with you guys. I'm going to go back to the car, grab my phone real quick, and I'll be right back. He never made it to the car. He should have been back within a few minutes, and they didn't hear from him for hours. They went to check the car. The phone was still in the car. He had left his phone behind, all his gear behind. All he had was the skiing clothing that he had on when they were out there. And he was just gone. There was no signs of a struggle there.
Was this the guy that I think some other skiers saw, like tracks leading to like a lake or something that was frozen?
It might be. I can't remember. It's not in the mention here in the research I did.
Okay.
But, they waited a few hours and they still got no answer from him. Then definitely not his cell phone. So they became very worried, and a search was mounted. But it seemed as if he just dropped off the face of the earth, like a lot of these cases involve.
Right.
It was a week later that he called his wife. He called her, but he was dazed and confused, and he was calling her from a very unfamiliar cell phone. It was not his cell phone. He was incoherent, and he hung up on her before she can get any answers out of him. So she called him back, and he did pick up. But he was still confused and not sure where he even was. This had been the first trip to come in, and police acted on it, and they finally managed to track him down. He was in Sacramento, California, and that's quite a long ways from upstate New York. When they found him, he had gotten a fresh haircut. He had a brand new cell phone that he did not recognize, but he was still wearing all of his ski equipment and gear. Like all of that he disappeared in, he was still wearing it.
Yeah.
But somehow he had gotten a fresh haircut.
I was on the other side of the country.
Was on the other side of the country.
Okay.
Very, very strange. He says that the only brief memory he has is maybe being in some trucker's car, like cab, passing through Utah. And that's all he can remember in that fog that he was in.
Wow.
He had no memory of anything. Some people thought maybe he had fallen down and hit his head and gotten concussed and wandered off. How no one spotted him from his trip to New York to California is very, very strange. Like I said, he had that memory of Utah. But, to this day, there's no answer as to how he even got there. He returned back to Canada. He returned back to being a firefighter.
Right.
That was it. I mean, there's no answer.
No explanation.
No one ever came forward to say, hey, he got in my car and we drove him.
Yeah.
Or he was taken to a hospital somewhere.
Yeah.
Or I gave him a haircut.
Yeah.
Nothing.
He was just in Sacramento, fresh cut, but yet the same clothes.
And a phone he doesn't know how to pay for.
Yeah.
His story always stuck out to me, but he's only just one of several that are very similar to this. Like the one I was thinking of, now that I remember, this was yet another guy who was also an experienced outdoors guy.
Yeah.
Who they found, I think, his ski boots left next to this lake.
Yeah.
And there was no sign of him, and they searched and he was presumed dead.
Right.
They thought maybe he had fallen into the lake, even though they searched it when it thawed and all of this. But he showed up, I think, 15 months later at his father's house.
No.
No.
I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about?
He showed up at his aunt's house.
Oh, that's right.
Naked.
Right.
With no clothes.
And they drove him to his father.
And he could have sworn it had only been a couple days.
And they all were shocked because they thought he was dead.
Yeah. And he looked perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
There were no signs of any injuries to him whatsoever.
Yep.
But he was like taken aback because his aunt didn't even tell him what had happened yet. She drove him right to his father's house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his father nearly passed out because he thought he was looking at a ghost.
Right.
Like they were convinced he was dead.
Yeah.
And yet for him, it only been a couple days.
Well, that's it, and it's very common with the ones that they find. I mean, we could go on and on with these cases because we have watched so many of them. But with the little kids, those are always super interesting because
and eerie.
Because they end up where it's usually at campsites where they're within eye shot of their families 1 second, and then they're just gone, and they'll find them 20, 30 miles in the amount of time that it would take them to get that far on foot in rugged terrain.
I remember a 5-year-old that was found on top of a really rocky
high
mountain.
ledge.
Like on the ledge where only like eagles should
Like you would have to be an experienced climber
Yeah.
to get up to. And they found him looking over, and he couldn't. None of these kids are ever able to say.
Yeah. Was
what
that the
happened.
one where they were like talking to someone that looked like their grandparent or something?
That's Mount
That's
Shasta.
another eerie one.
Okay, that was Mount Shasta.
That's the Mount Shasta
Yeah.
one. That's really interesting. But the kids, most of them can't say what happened to them, but the ones that do are the ones that are always most interesting to me.
super
'Cause
eerie.
that's
Yeah.
where the paranormal aspect comes
Yeah.
in.
Because that one I was talking about, it was another campground scenario where, the families all had tents and whatnot and woke up and this, really small child was gone. They woke up outside of their tents, the adults, face down in the dirt.
Right.
All with some sort of mark on the back of their
Right,
neck, remember?
yeah.
And then when they do find him after searching for days,
Yeah.
he comes just walking down
Yeah.
one of the trails and says that he was in this cave. And they go and find this cave, and like his stuff's in there, like some of his stuff
Right.
and other stuff, like from other kids. And then he says, "Oh yeah, my grandma came and got me, and we went and we're in this cave, and she was long deceased.
Yeah.
She was never there.
No.
Yeah.
So this is
Or
the
was
kind of-
she?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Or was she?
This is the kind of stuff.
There's a whole episode I want to make on Mount Shasta because Mount Shasta, it's got a lot of strange stuff going on.
Oh, yeah.
Aliens, other worlds, an underground world, what you name it.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
but yeah, there's some strange
Telos.
stuff. Yes.
The other thing I find interesting, by the way, is how many years this has spanned. Because at least from when he started recording these cases,
Right.
I mean, mine, the original one, I think was in the 80s, like
Right.
81, 84, and then we're all the way to 2018 over here. I mean, it just shows you how many could have happened over these
course,
decades
yeah.
and maybe even before.
Well, yeah, because in his research, he actually uncovered stuff going back all the way to the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
Right.
And kids disappearing, especially during like the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
A lot of kids disappeared.
Oh, yeah.
And it just makes no sense.
Yeah, there's some weird stories that come out of this. And this one here that I'm about to talk about really gives me chills when I think about it. This is another one who has not been found.
Right.
So this is the case of Sandra Hughes. Sandra, she had trained at one point to even be a park ranger.
Right.
She was experienced in the outdoors. This came about during the COVID-19 outbreak, 2020.
Yeah.
I
not
remember this
long ago.
now.
Yeah, you know this one.
Yeah.
She was somebody who was like, everyone was kind of in a panic when all this was happening.
Right.
She was also kind of a loner in some ways and a
Yeah.
little bit eccentric in some other ways.
Right.
But she decided that she was going to just like pack up her gear and go camping and kind of get away from all the COVID business that was
Right.
happening. Her family was very used to her going on her own to go camping and do things.
Right.
That was just who she was. But she would always check in with them. So when they hadn't heard from her, they got a little concerned. And they, went out to kind of see the last place that they knew that she had been. And they found her campsite, and her campsite looked like it had been totally ransacked.
Right. I remember these photos.
And in fact, I think there were 2 other hikers that had come through and seen her campsite.
Yeah.
And that's how the family knew where she had been.
Right.
They were, really shocked, the family, because she was the type of person, because she was very much into the outdoors. If she left behind one little piece of litter, it would bother
Right.
her.
Yeah.
So to think that she would just start dumping out all her belongings everywhere and leave trash, and it was not like her at all.
Yeah.
So it was, that was strange enough. And this was on, I think, July 4th of 2020.
Okay.
So on July 5th, there were a couple of hikers, I think, another couple of hikers who thought that they saw her.
Yeah. Were they the one that were driving?
They might have been, no, not the ones who were
Okay.
driving. No, so this was another couple hikers who thought they saw her with a bruise on her face
Okay.
and looking kind of a little bit out of it, maybe.
Okay.
But, she didn't, interact with them at all or act like she needed help. They tried to ask her if she needed help, and she kind of like waved them on their way,
Yeah.
kind of thing, waved them off.
Okay.
So they, went off. And then once they started seeing all the reports, they realized, oh, this is the missing woman.
Right.
They reported it. People went out to the area to try and search. They couldn't find her. So then a couple of hunters see her, or who they later realize is her, leaning up against a tree. And again, she's just sort of almost looking past them,
Yeah.
not wanting to interact with them at all. They call out to her. They don't get a response. They figure, okay, well, I guess she doesn't want to be bothered.
Right.
But then they see a missing flyer once they go park at the trailhead or go back to the trailhead, and they're like, oh, this is the missing woman.
Didn't she have a certain characteristic? Or
She
something?
did, which, yeah.
Okay.
Her biggest thing that made her stand out was at the moment that she went missing, she had dyed her hair blue, like an electric
Right.
blue.
Okay.
So very, very much stood out. So
Yeah.
that's why these people were so sure,
Yeah.
this was her,
Right.
So the last thing to happen, the last sighting, a family was driving. And they were, I guess, trying to drive up this, off-roading trail.
Yeah, for lunch or something.
And they
right?
decided, yeah, they wanted to park somewhere for lunch.
Yeah.
And they wanted to try and drive up where they saw a view.
Right.
And as they were driving to where they were going to park, they had their kids with them. And their son, who was, maybe,
Thought he was 3.
like, yeah, he was young.
Yeah.
But he said, tried to tell him to stop, that there was a lady that needed help.
Right.
Right? I should tell you that they had found her car.
Right.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
They did find her car, and much like her campsite, it was very much stuff strewn all over the place.
And it was far away from the campsite.
It was, and the way it looked is that, and this is the odd part to me, is that it had gone under 20 miles an hour until it came to a rest and hit a tree.
Okay.
So to me, when I hear that someone hits a tree, I'm thinking, well, they're kind of out of control
Yeah.
to where they're hitting this tree. But
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going under 20 miles an hour and kind
Right.
of almost rest there,
Yeah.
it's either intentional or
Right.
something else. It's just very odd.
Yeah.
So even though they found it, they still didn't find her, obviously. So
Yeah.
back to the family. So they're trying to look where their son is pointing, and they're not seeing anything.
Of course.
They're like, we don't see anyone. Where is she? And he's saying, she's right there.
Yeah.
And he's like, she's right there. And he's describing the clothes she has on, which is the clothes she supposedly had on when she went missing.
Right. Okay.
Like blue jeans and a black top,
Right. Yeah.
but she's barefoot.
Okay.
And he's like, insistent that she's right there. And they're saying, she's laying right there. Her feet are up in the air and she has blue hair.
God, that's a trip.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
still, they're sitting right there and they
Yeah.
cannot see who he's talking about.
Right.
But this always brings us to what we talk about when it comes to kids and pets, right? And the
Yeah.
paranormal. There are a lot of people out there in the field who will tell you that kids and pets are very much more in tune with seeing
Yeah.
things that our adult minds have long since shut down and said, oh, well, that's not real.
Right.
You see plenty of videos all over TikTok of kids who are very, very small, who are insisting that they see someone right in front of them
Right. Yeah.
that aren't there on film. So for him to not have any knowledge of this woman, obviously, and describe what she's wearing and the color of her blue hair, and that she looked like she needed help, and in fact, I think he even said she was telling him that she needed help.
Yeah. I remember that now. And didn't she also have bruises?
Yes.
Much like the other
Yes.
people described?
So, of course, the family took the authorities back out there once they
Yeah.
realized, because I think what happened was the mom went home and posted on Facebook
Yeah.
about what had happened with the son.
Yeah.
And her family, Sandra's family, contacted them.
Yeah. And there were also like flyers and stuff
Right.
they showed. Yeah.
Yeah, so they went back out, took the authorities out to where they were, and could still find no sign of her. She's still missing to this day.
God, that really bothers me.
I know, me too. Me
'cause,
too.
If she is a entity, ghost, whatever you want
Right.
to call spirit,
Trying to
at
get
this
help.
point trying to get help. Mm-hmm. That's so sad.
It's very sad.
And then you have no idea where she even is.
No, and you yourself, from having done many spirit box sessions, Estes method,
Yeah.
how many times do we get people asking for help?
Oh yeah. A lot.
A lot. That is a very common theme, in fact, to where, they may not realize
Right.
the whole gravity of their situation.
Right.
And all they want is some help.
Exactly.
And you
Yeah.
can't give that to them,
Yeah, it's really hard, especially even when we try asking, like,
Sure, what can we do? Right.
And we can't get that straight answer.
In a case
Or
like-
there's
yeah.
the possibility we can't even help anyway
Right,
for
well,
what
yeah.
they're hoping for.
Well, because in a case like that, you got to wonder, does she just want to be found so that her family can be at peace?
Yeah.
Because I think for me, if I was no longer here
Yeah.
and you guys didn't know where I was, that would be the only thing I'd care about.
Yeah. Oh,
That
yeah.
I'd want you guys to be able to bury me or
Yeah.
cremate me and take me home, whatever.
Exactly, yeah.
So that just breaks your heart.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know?
That's one of the cases that I think sticks with
Yeah, me
people
too.
the most when it comes to missing 411.
For sure,
I think
absolutely.
it proves our
Recent.
point too when we talk about the paranormal and like ghosts. How many times do we hear investigators say, these ghosts must have died on the property?
Yeah.
This ghost must have died right here. This is the site they were murdered or whatever.
Absolutely.
And it's like, well, clearly people saw her wandering for how long in so many different areas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she was spotted all throughout.
Oh, yeah.
She could be
Definitely.
just walking around looking for help, and that's not
Yeah.
even where her body could
No.
Yeah.
be. She could be like
Absolutely.
trying to lead someone somewhere.
Yeah.
But because they took off and didn't really, have the means of helping her,
Yeah.
she could be like far and gone from wherever she was. I mean, the car thing kind of sounds like to me like someone
Dumped it.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To
And
me, it
maybe
sounds like they put it-
ransacked her
Yeah.
campsite and everything.
If she had
Yeah,
bruises, it sounded like
exactly.
she may have been attacked
Right.
because she was
could have been.
isolated and alone.
Yeah.
And they tore her stuff up and then dumped her car way away from where her campsite was.
Yeah.
Right.
Makes it impossible to find her, sadly, you know?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I was trying to, here we go. No.
I mean, look at the actor Julian Sands. He was
Yeah.
missing for months.
Yeah.
They just found
Just
him.
found him. Yeah, I was thinking about that too.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, he was gone for such a long time.
Again, in the San Bernardino Mountains.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean,
And he was experienced too, by
Yeah.
the way.
you know, and you saw what I don't know if you saw, but I read that he had just been talking to someone close about being worried about
Yeah, I read that.
like being missing.
Right.
Really?
And during one of these hikes, he said, you know,
Oh, wow.
I don't know what the exact context was, but he had relayed to someone like a concern that he was to go hiking one of these days and not come back.
Wow.
pretty much.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened.
Wow, that's eerie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it looks like we have time a little bit to talk about some of these theories.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you have your basic theories, accidents, obviously. You know, people, and there are plenty of those. Don't get me wrong. When you talk about the national parks, you know, hikers that go missing, whether they get heat stroke
Right.
or falling off a cliff or whatever it may be, some sort of injury that causes them to be trapped. And
yeah, I don't think it's all paranormal.
No, no,
or
no, of
anything,
course not,
Or
yeah.
even sinister forces. Like,
Right.
you know, how many times do you see in like cold weather, they
sure.
get hypothermia, and then
Yes.
because hypothermia, you don't always realize, but they strip their clothes off and lay them down because
Right.
they feel like they're getting hot, even though they're
Internally, yeah.
freezing.
Yeah.
And that's why so many people, when they are found, they're not clothed anymore. It's
Right.
because
Yeah.
of that. It's not like someone purposely laid the clothes out
yeah.
all the
Right.
time.
But see,
But-
you bring up a good point, though. In most of these accident cases, they're found in the long
Yeah.
run. Like even with Julian Sands,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, he was found how many months later, but still, you know, a lot of times, and most often, they end up being found eventually.
Yeah.
So, I mean, could some of these be? Sure. But some of the weirder ones, begs
Yeah.
the question.
There's one case in my mind too that's really strange. I don't remember that person's name or anything, but there's a young man who was working on a production of a documentary somewhere, and I don't know if you remember this, but he was in the middle of filming, and they had called cut or something, and all of a sudden people
Yeah.
saw him just run, take off.
Yeah, I remember now.
Someone noticed that he had been looking kind of strange, like there was something bothering him. But he had no history of mental illness. He had no history of taking off or anything. But in the middle of the production, he just runs off.
Right.
And people try keeping up with him, but he was running down a mountain straight down.
Yep.
And he didn't fall once. Somehow he managed to stay upright, ran all the way down the side of this mountain, and ran off into the woods.
Yeah.
And was never seen again. They never found him. Never found any signs of him.
Talk about bizarre,
yeah.
right?
Like, and it's strange because, like, again, no history of mental illness. He wasn't taking any prescription drugs or anything like that.
It was like he saw something that
Yeah,
freaked him
something
out.
freaked him out, and he
Yeah.
just took off.
Those are fun ones.
Yes,
Yeah. God.
that one always stuck to me. I'm like, why? What
Yeah, that's
caused him
really
to take
creepy.
off like that?
Right.
Well, the next theory is murder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Now, in a case like we talked about with Sandra Hughes, could she have been attacked while she was camping alone? 100%, yes, she
Yeah.
could have been. I think the more strange aspect of her case is, you know, the people who thought they saw her afterwards.
Right.
You know, that what were they exactly seeing?
Yeah.
You know. But yeah, I'm sure there are people who are murdered and disposed of.
Yeah.
It does happen.
there are plenty of cases on your podcast that you did.
Of course.
I mean, yeah, there could be some paranormal aspects to them, but I think it happens after the fact.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know,
Of course.
You know, I think there are definitely some sinister people out there.
Yeah.
People are always scarier
Yeah.
than the paranormal.
As my
in
other
opinion.
podcast shows, that's
Yeah.
100%
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also animal attacks. These are all like explanations that,
Right.
you know, are very
Rational.
Absolutely. Now we're going to get into, we're going to step it up a little bit of a notch.
Yeah, 'cause we are a paranormal podcast.
Yeah,
Right,
we are,
right.
of course.
Yeah.
People living out in the woods, or what conspiracy theorists know, the feral people.
Right.
The
right.
feral people are always interesting.
Yeah.
So, Anthony, do you want to explain what the feral people in general are?
I mean, in general, just kind of these mysterious humanoid figures. You don't know if they could be actual humans or not. Kind of who lost their minds a little bit. They went feral, in other words. They live in nature. They, kind of act animalistic, tribalistic. There's one case in particular.
I know
this person didn't go missing, but
No.
he very easily could have. He was hiking from, the border of Mexico and like California or something.
I can't remember the name of this
all the
trail.
way
It's very
to
famous.
the end of the northern continent.
Right.
So he's on this very particular path. He's riding his bike. He's on this very long journey. And about halfway through California, these two mysterious figures in all white, they can't tell if it's fur, clothing, whatever it is, begin following him. And it's for days he is on this path, and he keeps thinking he loses them. Every time he has to camp at night in the middle of the pitch black darkness, he hears running around his tent.
Running in circles
They come
around.
and start hitting his tent with their hands. You can hear them making like kind of animal noises.
Right.
And then he starts seeing lights. Like
Yeah.
Okay.
almost like beacon lights, like lamps.
Lanterns. yeah.
Lanterns running through the woods.
And just when he thinks he's far enough ahead of him, he sees them
He'll look down.
behind him in the distance. They're
Yeah.
back.
No.
It's like a bad horror movie, like a Stephen
Yeah.
King story, But eventually he found his way to, he just decided he's done with the trip, and he got off the path
Got help.
and rode his bike all the way down into the nearest town, which was like 50 miles away.
Yeah.
But he managed to get there, and he told the police what happened, and they never found these people.
No. But there's plenty of accounts of hunters coming across feral people, and
Yeah.
that's one of the theories that people who follow the 411 think may have something to do with some of these people who go missing, even the ones who are end up found later.
Yeah.
Maybe they're so traumatized by something.
You know what other thing hunters have found that I think is interesting that might correlate? Are the trap doors in the floor.
Well, we're
of the
going to talk
woods.
about the trap doors.
The trap doors are the most interesting thing to me.
Yeah, but I think, that kind of goes with the government theory too. So
It does.
It does, but no, I agree with you.
Because we don't know who these people are, the feral people,
Well,
where they
no, that's
came
true
from.
too.
We
We don't know. We're going to jump up now to what people think are a bit more of a stretch theories. Human trafficking,
of course.
which I don't know how much of a stretch that is.
I was gonna say I don't think that's a stretch.
I do think personally, just because of some of the cases I've covered on the other podcast, that to me, the human trafficking cases tend to take more place in populated areas,
Yeah.
and, people, especially women who end up abducted for that,
Yeah.
or runaways, they tend to be on the streets, or women shopping,
Yeah.
things that I've talked about. So I don't see that as much in, I think, national parks. Not to say that they couldn't stalk out hikers.
Ever happen, but
Right.
yeah, I see what you're saying.
Public parks seem to be a big target.
Yeah.
But I don't know about national parks. But government cover up. So this kind of
Okay.
goes along with what Anthony was saying with doors in the forest floor.
Let's make sure we say this is a theory.
A theory,
We're
of
not
course.
accusing anyone of anything. This is just a theory.
Yeah.
But
There have been, and this even David Paulides, this is one of the things that he covered when they would go out into the forest, trying to figure out what's happening with some of these cases. And a lot of people who have gone out trying to, hunters have also said this, but there's all of a sudden you'll hear this hum, this loud hum, like there's machinery or something coming from underneath them.
Okay.
Okay, and there have been cases of people who find these what seem like almost a door. Picture Lost, if you've seen Lost,
Yeah.
and they find the hatch.
yes.
Right.
Okay, so
I've heard that there are cases where they hear someone knocking on the doors too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
As if they're walking, all of a sudden you hear knocking on a door, but there's no door in sight until you
Right.
look down, and
Yeah.
there's this big trap
Absolutely.
door in the middle of the forest wall.
that kind of goes along with some stuff that we've talked about in the past.
Yeah.
But do you want to take over for a second now?
Yeah, these trap doors. People have these theories that the National Park Service could be a cover for government installations being installed.
Right.
For one reason or another. Of course, there's always experimentation, maybe on people, maybe with animal testing, weapons testing. Who knows?
Right.
Could some of these feral people be people who escaped these facilities?
Yeah, who are now a little different.
And now they kind of, the forest is their home.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Maybe. I mean, I won't discount it. Again, these are just theories.
Right.
Could this be alien related? Because there are a lot of cases where strange lights are seen in the forest.
Yeah.
Not just at eye level, but very, very high up. Brown Mountains.
Brown Mountains.
Brown Mountain
Doesn't
lights.
that happen a lot there?
Yes.
They're very known for that. Yeah.
The Appalachian Mountains too are like super populated with missing 411
Yeah.
cases.
Oh yeah.
I mean, government is definitely a huge one. Some of the ones I hinted at earlier with kids who have stories to tell.
Yeah.
Again, most kids kind of stay mute about it or they don't remember, but there are some kids who have stories to tell about humanoid beings. Sometimes they look like relatives they know or just a regular person. But some of the more interesting ones to me are the ones who kind of look like Bigfoot.
That was the next one I was going to talk about.
Some people think that these people go missing because of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them. The fact that these Sasquatch can never be found, we've talked about the whole interdimensional thing in previous podcasts. But what about also these trap doors? Could they be using, because we've talked about how Bigfoot has been seen at Edwards Air Force Base in California.
Right.
And the secret tunnels that they have underneath where they're transporting weapons.
Right.
That's why it was such a huge deal that these creatures were seen, because they shouldn't be in these underground tunnels.
Yeah.
Could they be utilizing the same tunnels that government people have put into the national forest?
Well, we talk about tunnels. We can also talk about the Mammoth Cave system is another.
Oh, yes.
Another theory is,
the largest cave system in the United States. You can, if you know, we've talked about them a lot on Hellier. The team on Hellier investigated these caves a lot because there was a lot of weird activity around them.
Right.
And one of their team members in season 2 brought to their attention a lot of missing people. Who went missing near these Mammoth Cave systems.
Exactly.
Some people actually reported seeing 2 little figures with what they would describe as wands, even though I don't know if that's exactly what they were.
Right.
That could paralyze people. And 2 people who saw another person being dragged into one of these tunnels in these cave systems. Those 2 people were hit with stuns, and it stunned them. And then when they woke up, they were gone.
Yep.
Disappeared.
Well, there's another thing too when you mentioned Hellier and that whole scenario with the Brown Mountains that Allie brought up.
Yeah.
In the very beginning of the season, I think it was season 2, where they go to Brown Mountain. They went there because they had another friend that was showing them this, what in a cave entrance, what looked like a blocked off area to an underground old military tunnel.
Yeah.
And it looked as if, imagine if you're watching an old episode of Batman and the big rock lifts up and he's going into the Bat Cave. It looked like some big slab of rock was almost like a door, but coming down and blocking this entrance now.
Right.
That would have gone into some of these underground tunnels that Anthony was talking about, military related.
Well, and then there's the other theory that one of the men who kind of inspired the Hellier case, Alan Greenfield, he had an interview with an individual who supposedly called himself Terry R. Rist, or Reist, and he claimed that he was part of a group who invaded underground alien task force bases.
Right.
Pretty much bases where aliens had established themselves deep underground.
Yeah.
And their job was to go underground and pretty much take them out and destroy the base and move on. And supposedly there's rumors that their national parks, or in this case the Brown Mountains, there is such a cave. There is such a cave that has an entrance to an alien underground base.
Right.
And that's why you constantly see lights rising from the forest into the air and then disappearing and zooming off, but then they come back.
Right.
That's another theory, that some of these people go missing because they were being abducted.
Yeah.
Or taken somewhere, either by the government or by aliens, or maybe both.
There's so many theories. I mean, I have just 2 more I wanted to try and get in before we have to wrap very quickly. One of them is stairs in the middle of the forest that lead to nowhere.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone here has ever heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
But there are a lot of, whether there be park rangers, hikers, whomever, that will be in the middle of the forest and come across a set of stairs that don't seem to lead to anywhere. or like they were ever attached to anything.
Yeah.
And there was a very specific case I know of a couple of park rangers out doing some rounds, and they came across stairs like this.
Yeah.
And one of them told the other one not to go walk up these stairs, that they've been told to never try and walk all the way up. And, you know, the other guy was, you know, you're crazy. And
Yeah.
you walked up there and, you know, suddenly it just kind of just fell, couldn't explain what had happened to him, you know. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's another one of the theories from the 411 world
Right.
is that. And the other one kind of makes me think of the case you talked about today, Anthony. And the other one we mentioned where he ended up on his aunt's doorstep. But time jumps.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I know we probably talked about this when we did the audio podcast, you know, a while back, but talked about time slip hauntings and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you're not familiar, I mean, it's just like what it sounds like. You know, you're here 1 minute, I'm sitting in my chair talking to you,
Yeah.
and the next minute I wake up, I'm entirely somewhere else. Whether it be, you know, in time, I'm somewhere else,
Yeah.
or I'm elsewhere. Don't know how I got there. I'm in the same place I was, but it's years down the road, and this is a totally different office.
Right.
You know, so when I think about this guy who starts out in New York and ends up in California and doesn't know how he got there,
Yeah.
or the other guy who was gone for 15 months, you got to kind of wonder.
Yeah.
I thought about
exactly.
that with the stairs thing too, because, you know, stairs appearing out of nowhere is such a strange thing to see.
Right.
But, you know, we talk about parallel worlds sometimes when we're talking about this stuff. And,
Sure.
You know, the time slips can kind of play into that. What if those stairs exist some other time or some other place?
And they led to somewhere.
Yeah.
Like, what if it's a park in our world,
Right.
but that national park is actually something developed somewhere else?
Right.
And those stairs actually do go to some building or something in whatever development this is,
Sure.
but not in our world, in their world. And
Yeah.
something happened, some thin layer of reality opened up to where it slipped through,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, we've seen that happen. How many times do we see footage of planes that stop midair,
Yeah.
you know? Or,
Those are fun.
you know, animals that suddenly just stop and
Yeah.
like stop moving and glitch out, you know?
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of,
Let's not get talking about
I know, that
glitches
could
in
go
the
on
Matrix.
forever. That's a whole other episode, but yeah.
Well,
yeah.
yeah. So that's the 411 phenomenon.
And those are just a few cases. I'm
Right.
sure we could do whole episodes on other cases, but
Oh yeah.
that's just the tip of the iceberg.
If you have any that you'd like to share with us, you know, be sure to comment, and don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, check out our merch store, all of those good things.
Yeah, sign up for our Patreon.
There you go.
If you have any information on the cases we mentioned for some reason, please feel free to call local law enforcement. We'll leave some links down below that we find for missing people. You can contact them because you never know.
Right.
But that's our podcast today, guys.
And as usual, we thank everybody for watching and listening. And I'm going to throw it to Anthony.
Thank you guys for another great episode. And remember, don't fear the unknown.